Hello there everybody, welcome to iTTV. For today's lesson, let's look at growth, primary and secondary growth in plants. So firstly, there are different types of growth in plants because plants' growth can be seen in two basic growth patterns, limited and unlimited. For annual plants, these are the plants that grow for a short period or a year and eventually die. Therefore, the plants show limited growth and a sigmoid curve. The growth is until the maximum growth in which it matures and bears flowers and fruits. This later is followed by negative growth before death. Now, as you can see that there are two different types of growth patterns in plants. One is limited and the other unlimited. For limited growth, this is usually by plants which we call annual plants. That means they live only for 1 year. After 1 year, they die. So their growth curve is in an S shape. As you can notice that, once they reach a maximum growth, then they will experience negative growth and then they will die off. So examples of such annual plants that live only for 1 year, they are mostly monocotyledons and herbaceous dicotyledons. Primary growth is another name given to this type of growth. So primary growth, as you can see from the graph, is dry mass versus time in weeks. So for this plant, it only lives maximum for about, slightly less than 30 weeks. So therefore, as you can see, by about the 29th week, the plant has died. So for perennial plants, these plants show growth pattern with annual series of sigmoid curves, and each sigmoid curve represents 1 year of growth. Therefore, these plants show unlimited growth, means they grow continuously throughout their lives. A slim dip at the end of each sigmoid curve represents the shedding of leaves and fruits. So as you can see from the graph, which is height versus time in years. Just now it was time in weeks because those were annual plants. They live only maybe even less than 1 year. But for the perennial plants, perennial means they live for more than 1 year. So that's why the graph is plotted height versus time in years. So as you can see from the growth curve, it's a series of sigmoid curves, whereby each mini sigmoid curve represents 1 year of growth. And secondary growth is another name given to this type of growth. Example of perennial plants that live for more than 1 year would be the woody plants, like the teak and the oak. Shrubs, some monocotyledonous and hardwoods, such as Meranti, Ch.01, and so on. So these are the more hardier woody type of dicotyledonous plants, and there are some monocotyledonous plants that also are known as the perennial plants that undergo secondary growth. So what is primary growth? This growth occurs in apical meristem tissues in the apex of the shoot and the root. At the tip of the shoot and root, there are three regions in which cell division, cell elongation, and cell differentiation actually happens. So in the region of cell differentiation, there are also root hairs. So as you can observe from the diagram, these meristem tissues are tissues that are still able to differentiate and grow. So they are found at the tip of the shoot and root, alright, because there's potential for growth. And what happens is that in the tip of these shoot and roots, there are three regions where we have the zone of division, elongation, and maturation. Now, let's move on to the next part of the slide. That in the shoot, there are presence of leaf primordia and buds at the nodes. So even at the tip of the shoot, there are some tissues, there are some meristem tissues whereby there are three regions of growth, which are also the zone of cell division, elongation, and differentiation. So it's really interesting that, leaves, they experience primary growth only at the tip of the roots and tips of the shoots because there are meristem tissues there. Now, growth at apical meristem leads to the formation of mature primary tissues such as primary phloem and xylem in the vascular bundle. The main role of primary xylem is to transport water from roots to leaves, while the main role of primary phloem is to transport sugars from leaves to other parts of the plants. Together, xylem and phloem serve as support for the plant. Now, as you can observe, that growth at apical meristem is very important because it leads to primary growth. Now, this is known as primary growth, which will give you the primary xylem and primary phloem, which the functions I'm sure you are very clear of. So, the picture, this diagram, do not worry too much if it looks very complex because we'll look at it again later in the lesson. Now, let us look at secondary growth in dicotyledonous plants, because later we'll look at secondary growth in monocotyledonous plants. Now, after primary growth is completed, secondary growth continues in lateral meristems of woody plants and shrubs. So as mentioned, primary growth happens at the apical meristem of the tip of the shoot and the root, and therefore secondary growth will then continue in the lateral meristems. And these lateral meristems are found in two types. You have the vascular cambium, is found in between vascular tissues consisting of xylem and phloem and gives rise to these new vascular tissues. Whereas you also have lateral meristems which are found in as cork cambium, found beneath epidermis of the stem, which divides to produce cork. So what happens is that besides the apical lateral meristem that we had noticed just now, the apical meristem at the tip of the roots and the shoots, we also have lateral sideways meristem. Two types, which will be vascular cambium found between primary xylem and phloem, and we have cork cambium that will divide to give us the cork beneath the epidermis. So, firstly, let's look at the function of the cambium cells, specifically the vascular cambium cells. So the cambium cells located in between vascular tissues, they divide to produce one inner layer that forms secondary phloem, causing primary xylem to be pushed towards the pith, while one outer layer forms secondary phloem, causing primary phloem to be pushed towards the epidermis. So you can see from this picture, right? So I think that if the picture is a bit too small, let me draw for you the picture on board. So as you can observe, this is actually like part of the stem, like a cross section of the stem, as it's just a magnified version of the picture in the PowerPoint slide. Now basically this is the pith, alright, and this is the epidermis of the stem. Alright, and so this shows you the two cambium tissues. Firstly will be the vascular cambium. Of course, this is really important. The vascular cambium is the star here. So let's zoom in on the vascular cambium, because when it's time to actually differentiate, the vascular cambium will produce the secondary xylem on the inner part, and it will push the primary xylem towards the pith. Whereas the vascular cambium also will produce the secondary phloem here, and it will push the primary phloem towards the epidermis. And as you can see, this colored part is the other cambium tissue, which is known as the cork cambium, which will actually produce cork tissue here, which is pushed towards the epidermis. So with that, that is how the cambium tissue actually grows the stems laterally. So that's how the diameter of the stem grows sideways laterally. In other words, what is actually being seen will be, okay, let's say this is part of the stem, okay, a cross section of the stem. So generally you have your xylem and phloem bundles, right? Your xylem, phloem bundles. Yeah, they really look like cucumbers, right? xylem and phloem are here. So what happens is that perhaps you have your vascular cambium. Okay, this will be the vascular cambium. Okay, this is known as the vascular cambium. And when it's time for growth, right, what happens will be that then it will produce new secondary xylem. So this part here will be the pith, like that, the pith. And this bluish part is known as the secondary xylem. So the secondary xylem is being formed towards the inside, closer to the pith. While we have the secondary phloem. So the secondary phloem is being formed on the outside. Okay, so secondary phloem. Okay, so as you can see, yeah, and this is known as the so that's the secondary phloem outside. Okay, secondary phloem on the outside, secondary phloem on the inside, vascular cambium in the middle. Okay, and of course the outside here will be the epidermis. So the primary phloem will be pushed outside to the epidermis like this. Okay, the primary phloem will be pushed towards the epidermis. So sometimes the epidermis can rupture, and that's why it is important that new cork produced by the cork cambium will be produced. As every year you add, more and more secondary phloem. So the primary phloem gets pushed and ruptures the epidermis, hence the need for formation of new cork to harden the woody stem. And as you can see, the secondary phloem is formed, being pushed, right, and pushing the primary xylem towards the pith. So if you look at it here too as well, the secondary xylem is formed here, so the primary xylem is not shown here. Primary xylem, primary phloem is not shown here. Only the formation of secondary xylem inner, secondary phloem outer. So it pushes the primary phloem towards the pith. So this is a very simplified structure of how the vascular cambium actually produces the secondary xylem inside and the secondary phloem on the outer part. Okay, so I hope that you have a better understanding of the lateral meristem growth. So, growth of secondary xylem makes the outside tissues to be compressed, increasing the circumference and stretching the epidermis sideways. This growth causes the rupturing of epidermis and replacement of cork by division of the cork cambium. So that was what was mentioned just now, because growth of the secondary xylem and the secondary phloem will increase the circumference and it will cause the epidermis to rupture, hence the replacement of cork by division of the cork cambium. Now, woody plants that grow on temperate climate does not have a consistent growth throughout the year. During the spring and summer, growth can be seen to be rapid as conditions are favorable as sunlight and rain are sufficient. But large size and thin wall cells will then be produced. But during late summer and autumn, growth seems to slow down, causing lesser cells to be produced. Small size cells with thick walls will be produced, and obviously during winter, the cambium stays inactive. So of course, plants in those countries with temperate seasons, with the 4 seasons, the growth rate of the plants are also depending on the season. Because when the weather is hot and sunny, like spring and early summer, then photosynthesis rates will be high, cambium is active, and a lot of larger cells with thin cell walls will be produced. But in the opposite end of the spectrum, when it's going to be autumn, autumn where the leaves will turn beautiful colors, then the growth rate will be a bit slower and the cells will start to become smaller with thicker cell walls because the photosynthesis rate will be reduced. And obviously during winter, there are no leaves. All the leaves have already dropped, so the vascular cambium and the cork cambium will be inactive. So these differences in growth cause presence of annual rings, which are rings of light and dark wood in the cross-section of the stem. Each ring represents 1 year growth and can be used to estimate the age of the tree. So as you can see, as the tree ages year by year, it actually produces rings of light and dark wood in the cross-section of the stem, and thus a person is definitely able to know accurately the age of the tree by counting the number of light and dark rings. Now, let us look at secondary growth in dicotyledonous roots. Now, vascular cambium are found in between vascular tissues. They divide to produce secondary xylem on the inside. So just like the roots, as you can notice, alright, just like the stem. Okay, so the vascular cambium, just like in the stem, cross-section of the stem, but now I'm talking about vascular cambium roots, that it will produce secondary xylem on the inside and it will also produce secondary phloem on the outside, just like the stem. So the growth of the secondary xylem on the inside and secondary phloem on the outside, what are the consequences? So these growths will compress both primary xylem and primary phloem, and the cork cells produced beneath the epidermis of the roots by cork cambium will protect the root tissues, thereby signifying the importance of the cork cambium to divide to produce cork. Now, so that actually ends about our secondary growth in dicotyledonous plants. Now, what about secondary growth in monocotyledonous plants? As you know, these plants, they do not have secondary growth except in stems of certain perennial plants like aloe, agave, cordyline, dracaena, and yucca. All of them are genus names, and if you look at the diagram, it's a cross-section of the stem of a monocotyledonous plant. So you can see the primary vascular bundle and the cambium. And as the cambium divides, it produces more secondary vascular bundles. And therefore, the diameter of the stem is obviously larger because of lateral growth. Monocotyledonous plants are a little bit different because their structures are simplified. So as you can see, the vascular cambium is in the cortex of the stems. So new cells that are formed on the inside, then they will differentiate to form secondary vascular tissues, which in this case here, new cells that are formed towards the epidermis, they become secondary cortex. Now, let us look at something else. Let's move on to the importances of primary and secondary growth in plants. Now, primary growth is responsible for an increase in the height of a plant that aids in reaching sunlight, increase in length of roots for searching of water. So that is the main reasons why we have primary growth. Now, for primary phloem and xylem, they help in transportation of products of photosynthesis and water in plants. Besides that, they give support for young plants. Secondary growth that increases diameter and girth of stems and roots gives support to the plants to be able to withstand the increasing weight. So now there is always primary growth, which is increase in height, and there is secondary growth, which is increase in diameter of the stem and the roots, caused by the vascular cambium and cork cambium, which divide according to certain time purposes. So what happens is that secondary growth increases diameter and girth, and it is important to give support to the plants to be able to withstand the increasing weight. Of course, if somebody grows taller, but if the person doesn't grow wider, it's very hard to support the weight of the whole plant. So it's important that not only there must be primary, but also secondary growth as well. Now, the thickened cork and bark will give protection by reducing evaporation of water from stem, protect plant against infection by insects and parasitic fungi, and to guard the plant body against variation in external temperature. So it's really important that the cork cambium is there to always divide to produce the cork to actually protect against some fungi, parasites, as well as to reduce evaporation of water. Now let's look at comparison between plants that experience secondary growth and those that do not. So as we look at this table, because the notes are in the table, so it's easier for students to study for their exams. Now, plants that undergo secondary growth are mostly the dicotyledonous plants, whereas plants that do not undergo secondary growth are mostly the monocotyledonous plants. Now, plants that undergo secondary growth, they have vascular cambium, while plants that don't have secondary growth, they do not have vascular cambium. They don't need to. And plants that undergo secondary growth, there's presence of cork cambium, and secondary cortex. While plants that do not have secondary growth, there is no cork cambium, and secondary cortex. Now, plants that do not undergo secondary growth naturally do not have vascular cambium as well as the cork cambium. Thereby, there is absence of cork as well. Now, take note that there are some monocotyledonous plants that do undergo secondary growth. That's why the term is mostly monocotyledonous plants, not all monocot plants. Plants that undergo secondary growth naturally are bigger in size in terms of length, in height, diameter. They have woody stems, presence of primary and secondary vascular tissues, and they also are the perennial plants. Whereas plants that do not undergo secondary growth, they tend to be smaller in size, have non-woody stems, they have primary vascular tissue only, and they live for one season only. So they usually live for about 1 year or even less than 1 year, or perhaps even one season. So they tend to be not so hardy and they don't have a woody stem. So those were in table form the importances of and a comparison between primary and secondary growth. Now, let's look at something else. Let's look at the economic importance of plants that undergo secondary growth. Now, this is economic importance because just now we looked at the general importance of secondary growth in plants. Now, what are economic importance? Firstly, secondary growth permits growth, propagation and survival for many years in plants such as angiosperms, which bear flowers and seeds season after season. Trees increase in height and size that favors in reaching sunlight for photosynthesis, especially for trees to compete with other plants in dense tropical and equatorial jungle. Also increase in thickness of stem and trunk for greater support, and wood from woody trees have many commercial values such as in construction, furniture and logging industry, which benefits economy. Secondary vascular tissues such as secondary xylem and phloem aid transportation of water and products of photosynthesis in greater amounts for larger trees. So for example, those really hardy woody trees like the Ch.01, Bakau, Meranti and Balau, they really have great benefits in construction, furniture and logging industry. That's economic importance. And because in a tropical jungle, it's always survival of the fittest. Trees are always competing and fighting with each other to get the sunlight. So therefore, they really need to grow taller and taller. And in order for the tree to support its weight, it needs to grow in diameter to support the total weight of the growing plant. So, flowering plants, as you know, the economic importance, they're valuable ornamental plants in gardens and parks, which beautifies nature. And reforestation programs are established in replanting hardwoods that has been cut down. So because the governments, all around the world are aware of the importance of plants, not only for the social and environmental benefits, but also the need to understand how important the role they play in the balance of our ecosystem. So because of that, they have all these special reforestation programs established. And with that ends our lesson on secondary growth as well as primary growth in plants. Let's look at some questions to test your knowledge. Which of these never refers to lateral meristems? A. Vascular cambium is found in between vascular tissues. Vascular cambium consists of stems and roots. Cork cambium found beneath epidermis of the stem. Cork cambium divides to produce cork. Now, what do you think is your answer? If you have followed closely what I drew on board, I'm sure you'll get it. Now, for this question, let's look to the board to answer it. Now, the question is asking you which is false, which is not true about lateral meristems. So the first one is vascular cambium is found in between vascular tissue, and that's spot on. Even in dicotyledonous or even in monocotyledonous plants, the vascular cambium is found between the vascular tissue meaning the xylem and the phloem, so option A is true. Now option B, vascular cambium consists of stems and roots. Now that doesn't make sense, that's obviously false. But let's have a look at why options C and D are true. Now, cork cambium is found beneath the epidermis. That's true. Cork cambium is found beneath the epidermis. Option D. Cork cambium divides to produce cork. That's correct. Excellent. Cork cambium divides to produce cork. So that's why the answer for this question is option B, that vascular cambium is made out of stems and roots, which is obviously incorrect. Now, cambium cells are located in between vascular tissues. They divide to produce, A, one inner layer that forms secondary xylem, causing primary xylem to be pushed towards the pith, and B, one outer layer to form primary phloem, causing secondary phloem to be pushed towards the epidermis. C, one inner layer that forms primary xylem, causing secondary xylem to be pushed towards the pith. And D, one outer layer forming cortex, causing primary phloem to be pushed towards the epidermis. Now, this one also, it's very closely linked to the first question. Do give it a try. Now, to answer this question, let's look to the board as well so that you can have a clearer understanding. Now, they're saying that cambium cells located in between the vascular tissue, what is it for? To produce what? So the first one, it causes one inner layer that forms the secondary xylem, causing the primary xylem to be pushed towards the pith. That's spot on, that's right. When they form secondary xylem, it causes the primary xylem to be pushed towards the pith. So option A is right. But in order to test yourself, sometimes it's good for you to examine the other options and see what is wrong with the options. Option B, one outer layer forming primary phloem. Now that's not true because the vascular cambium forms secondary phloem and not primary phloem. So that is wrong. Next, one inner layer that forms primary xylem. Now that's wrong again because the vascular cambium forms secondary xylem and not primary xylem. So option C is wrong. Now option D, one outer layer that forms cortex, causing primary phloem to be pushed towards the epidermis. Now, it is true that the primary phloem, is pushed towards the epidermis because this is known as the secondary phloem. So it's true that the primary phloem is pushed towards the epidermis, but the wrong part of the statement is that it does not form an outer layer that forms the cortex, because statement D says one outer layer forms cortex. That's incorrect. The outer layer does not form cortex. So option D is illogical, not for dicotyledonous plants. So option D is wrong. The answer is option A. Now let's look at the next question. Which of these best describes limited growth? A slim dip at the end of the sigmoid curve shows shading of leaves. B, plants show only one sigmoid curve. C, plants show growth pattern with annual series of sigmoid curves. D, each sigmoid curve represents 1 year growth. Now be very careful, the question is on limited growth and you will get the answer. If you had shown option B, congratulations, you are right. The answer is for limited growth, or they're known as annual plants. These plants only show one sigmoid curve and they only last for one season only. The other option A, C and D, they are descriptions for unlimited growth. For perennial plants, plants that grow for and fruit and flower for season after season. Now next question. Growth curve of perennial plants has dash and dash. Annual series of sigmoid curves, one sigmoid curve, a slim dip at the end of each sigmoid curve, and negative growth before death. Now this is a very clever question because it fuses the characteristics of limited and unlimited growth. So do be careful at which one you choose. Okay, if you had chosen 1 and 3, you are right. Well done. Now, because perennial plants, if you remember the graph, it was a staircase, it was not really staircase, but it was a series of sigmoid curves because they grow and they last for many years. And mostly they're the woody type of plants, mostly dicotyledonous plants that are hardy. So they have an annual series of sigmoid curves. Number 1 is right, and number 3, there's a slim dip at the end of each sigmoid curve that represents perhaps the shedding of leaves during autumn. So the answer is option B. Now let's look at some short structure questions. Firstly, describe unlimited growth pattern. Okay, unlimited growth pattern will be the growth pattern for perennial plants. That your answer should have perennial plants show growth pattern with annual series of sigmoid curves, and each sigmoid curve represents 1 year growth. Therefore, these plants show unlimited growth means they grow continuously throughout their lives. A slim dip at the end of each sigmoid curve represents shading of leaves and fruits. Secondary growth is another name given to this type of unlimited growth. Example of perennial plants are woody plants, shrubs, and some monocotyledonous and hardwoods. So this one is a little bit of memory recall that basically if you looked at the previous MCQ, that the growth curve of all these perennial plants, they show an annual series of sigmoid curves. And let's look at our last question for today. List down the importance of primary growth in plants. Why is primary growth in height so important? Now, if you had written this answer, well done, marvelous effort. Now, firstly, you should say that primary growth is responsible for an increase in height of the plant that aids in reaching sunlight. You could say increase in length of roots for searching of water. Besides that, primary phloem and xylem helps in the transportation of products of photosynthesis and water in plants. And they also are there to give support for young plants. So this ends our lesson on primary and secondary growth in plants. So thank you so much for watching iTTV. It was such an enjoyable session with all of you, and I hope that you had gained a lot of knowledge from this. So we hope that you have a marvelous week ahead and take good care of yourselves.